Uncle John is up next. We're going from Guahan to back to Australia. Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. You're as a biocultural strategist. How did you think about that question where is Indigenous knowledge going right now? How did you decipher that question?
I deciphered it in terms of, I suppose, things that I'm doing at the moment. It's really accelerating here in Australia. So sort of the 2 points of where it's at for me is I sit on the Scientific Advisory Committee for the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area. So we provide advice to the board about research, where to head in terms of protecting those values and presenting those values in the World Heritage Area. And also I'm still in Minister Enoch, Queensland Government, and we've just done landmark reforms to the Biodiscovery Act in terms of Indigenous access and benefit sharing. So that's sort of 2 places where it's really heading really well for us and being able to participate in those.
In general, when it comes to Indigenous knowledge, are you in a broader Pacific context? Are you, in your experience, what you're seeing, are you concerned or are you optimistic, or is it somewhere in between?
I think it's somewhere in between. I think it's just listening to, it's really about our people's input into these things, but then even more so about creating change. And you see some of, on my dad's side, I'm Aboriginal, but my mum's side, I'm Vanuatu. But, looking at what people are talking about happening in those lands, it's the same issues, but I suppose it's struggling against the bureaucracy and the political scope about trying to get these things moving much more quickly. So that seems to be a similarity, but people are focused, they're seeing those impacts on their home country, their resources that they access, either for food, fibre, medicine, yeah.
Any reflections on relevance of Indigenous knowledge in the world we live in today? Maina talked about COVID-19. I don't know if you want to talk about that. What comes to mind in terms of relevance?
Relevance, knowing what's happening within the World Heritage Wet Tropics at the moment, the scientific modelling was saying that changes were happening in 10 years' time, but they're happening right now. So, the movement of species to elevation, southward, deeper into the ocean, that's got a real interruption to our cultural diversity. It means we're going to have to hand over knowledge to maybe groups, 200 kilometres down the coast. So there's a real, that whole change actually is going to occur through, and I work in that biocultural diversity interface, so it's really about the biological, linguistic and the cultural interrelatedness to our landscapes are going to change dramatically. We've got to make some really solid decisions about how we hand knowledge on and how it's moved to the next group, but that's going to be dictated by, with plants, the right soil type, or the right temperature for things. So, our groups up in the rainforest that are in the highlands, if temperatures come in like they are shifting now, it means they no longer will have cloud forests because the clouds won't clip the top of the forests. And
something that was quite remarkable that you were involved in, and maybe I think can be very inspiring to other Indigenous peoples in the Pacific, was that landmark reform that you talked about in terms of biodiversity legislation in the Queensland Government of Australia. I'm sure that there's you cannot explain everything in 10 minutes. But is there a 2-minute version of it that you can explain it to the people that are watching?
Yeah, look, the biodiscovery is really about that access of benefit sharing. To get access to that knowledge, you have to have a traditional knowledge obligation under the Act, and that was a real drive. So we, as the traditional knowledge roundtable, were meeting also with the research entities from the university and government and so on, and having these conversations about how we protect this, how we make it function. So so really it's about gaining access and so having protocols. So the last part of what the work we're doing now is developing a code and guidelines for that, so that research entities will know what to do. And if they step outside that or don't do that, there are ramifications financially and legally. But yeah, look, so, and then the benefit sharing obviously is a whole range of things. So benefit sharing for us is not just monetary wise, because it takes so long to some of these biopharmaceuticals to come out, for example, green chemistry. But it might be as simple as when researchers go out, someone needs a ride out into country, so right through that sort of spectrum of what benefit sharing might be for people. So yeah. But, and also, I've got a really good friend of mine in the Cape that has global patents through a partnership that he has with one of the universities, around an oil they've made from a paper bark.
So something that I've just a different question, like kind of left field kind of question. In terms of when agricultural strategies, anything in terms of that delta, the triangle, in your work, climate change, indigenous knowledge, as well as oceans and waters. In what I'm experiencing is that there's not enough in terms of advocacy, at least, like knowledge, advocacy of indigenous knowledge being pushed as a form of as a terms of reference next to scientific knowledge, to maintain biodiversity, to safeguard the biodiversity. Any thoughts on that matter, that from your own experience, from your own expertise?
Yeah, look, I'm more and more driving towards not saying that Indigenous knowledge is not important. I'm saying it's important, but there's also another level, and that other level is Indigenous science. And this came to the fore back in 1999 when I was doing a documentary for French television, and we were filming an old lady, and I just, in my head, it just, the light bulb moment. They had to choose what bark to use. They had to choose what type of carrier oil, whether, what biological fat, whether it was plant or animal, or was it going to be mineral. And so this whole scientific process just jumped into my mind. It's not yes, it's about knowledge, but it's actually about a science process. The way that we look at the natural laws around us, a problem in front of us, and we have these theories, and we've gone on to really test those theories, formulating. And in the end, we've got the medicines that best suit us, or, so, and that's changed. And I've been really pushing that through the biodiscovery. I've been really pushing it right now. I've just finished this week 2 meetings with the Indigenous reference groups that's been developed by CSI Aroha in Australia, and we're looking at climate change from Indigenous perspectives, so, and I'm constantly pushing the science now, because that's, to me, that's what it is. There's knowledge that happens at a customary level, and then there's knowledge that happens at a community level. But the customary level is the science level. It's the people with deep understanding about that and the testing of those theories. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for explaining that, because that's like to many Indigenous peoples, not only in Pacific, like a blind spot, something that is not enough talked about. Indigenous sciences, at least from my own experiences, dealing with Indigenous peoples globally throughout the United Nations. We'll talk about Indigenous knowledge. We're now in that conversation or argument, actually, traditional knowledge versus Indigenous knowledge. And they're not even, it's not even a conversation about Indigenous science as much as it should be at this point. Any Any I guess final questions. My final question. Anything that I did not ask you, but you're like, oh, Ghazali, I can't believe you did not ask me about this. I really want to talk about it. It happens. It happens. I apologize. It happens.
No, look, no, because I think it's just I'll leave you with two things that I'm really passionate about, and these come out of our own old knowledge systems. And Yumbu is language word for my rainforest country. So I'm Mullumbara Yidinji. Mullumbara is a clan group, flatstone country. Yidinji is a tribal group, and Yumbu actually is a spatial art form. It's a series of dots and lines, and spatially how we map out things. And I've used that now to jump into that type of mapping in landscape. And the other one that I'm really passionate about, and something I want to do as a project quite soon, is Google. And Google is purposeful voice. Everything in our culture has a purposeful voice. And so, for example, if someone puts a road in, and there's a bridge, and you hear that noise by cars running over grids, that can disrupt sound signatures. So if there's a frog habitat, you can knock that habitat out for about 45 minutes, and animals can come in and pinpoint individual frogs, so the sound signature is disrupted. So there's all these things in culture that our people will get into, and I think we've got actually a really good chance to be some of the preeminent scientists in the world, because we've got this innate connection to country, to our animals and our plants and our landscapes, and we have a science background. And that's going to be quite interesting to see what sort of emerges over time.
Uncle John, thank you so much for sharing that. I was for a brief moment, I thought you were going to talk about your passion for coaching junior rugby union. I think that's like, all right, or now I'm going to rugby union. Yeah. But
it's a science too. You've got to really understand that game to really think about where plays will end and what your next move will be. So yes,
yeah, definitely.
Three games playing. So.
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk. Hopefully, at some point. Obviously, 10 minutes is not enough. We can talk about more in length about that rugby union, and obviously your passion in terms of the bicultural atmosphere, that work that you do. Appreciate you so much for your work and everything else. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.